Okay, so hello, should I say good morning, good evening, and good night for everyone? Okay, today we are very happy to have our second seminar on this SMLQC seminars. So it's called the Seminars on Machine Learning in Quantum Chemistry and Quantum Computing for Quantum Chemistry. Okay, anyway, whatever is kind of the small seminar bi-weekly seminar. So today is our second time of our seminar. So let me first give you some short introduction about today's speakers and what is the purpose of this seminar. Okay, so maybe I will try to put my so maybe I can just use my slide like that. So today's speaker is Max Pinheiro from Marseille University, France. So I think I will introduce his background later. I think he will give us his a small talk which is titled in Discovering Patterns in Non-Adiabatic Molecular Dynamics with Machine Learning, the ULA MDYN package. So it's a quite complicated name, right? So before the starting of his talk, maybe let me try to give you some brief introduction about our seminar. So the seminar is called SMLQC. So it's seminars on machine learning in quantum chemistry and quantum computing for quantum chemistry, which are they are a set of online lectures and tutorials providing hands-on experience. We particularly, I really want to say this is a good idea. So I think we particularly encourage and give the platform for young scientists, young researchers like postdocs and PhDs to give the seminar here. So this means if you really have some good, know some good postdoc, good PhD student, you can really write to us, or just check this website and write to us and trying to apply the opportunity to give the seminar. I think this is very important for this young scientist, and also it's very important for us because we really can learn a lot of things from these young people. Okay, so I think if you have more questions about this seminar, you can go to this conference website. Okay. So I think the second purpose of this small seminar is we really want to bridge the symposium of this particular conference, which is called SMLQC. I think the first seminar is very successful, was very successful, which was held by Pavlo in Xiamen University. It is an excellent conference. In fact, it's really open a new field. Okay, so I think maybe this year there's a second one, which was held by Roland Lynch in Uppsala University in Sweden. So I think some of the people will go there. So I'm very happy to listen to some new lectures in the future. So I think concerning with the organizer, I think totally we are still a very young team, right? So I say it's very young. In fact, I think I'm the oldest person among these organizers, right? But anyway, whatever. So it's a set of we really have a small organizer team. I think there are many excellent scientists like Pavlo, Alexei, Julia, Max, and Arif. So Arif is still very young, right? So I think we have a very young team, and we really want to provide a very good platform for scientific discussion about machine learning in chemistry, in quantum chemistry. So I think the first speakers last time, our first lecture, so was given by Arif, who is in Xiamen University working with Pavlo now. He was talking about the quantum dissipative dynamics with machine learning. And today we have our second speaker is Max Pinheiro from Marseille University. I think he will talk about discovering patterns in non-adiabatic molecular dynamics with machine learning. And he will also introduce some useful computational package. And we also have some upcoming talks which was given here, okay? So I think if you, in the future, next time, more people can get to be involved. So let me try to give you a very brief introduction about today's speaker. So it's Dr. Max Pinheiro. I think he completed his master's degrees in physics from Federal University of Pernambuco in 2014. He obtained his PhD degree from University of Sao Paulo, University of Sao Paulo. He served as associate professor at the United Metropolitan College, and then went for post position at the Institute of Aeronautical Technology. From 2020, he's a senior postdoc research in the light and molecular group led by Professor Mario Barbati at Marseille University. His current research focuses on development and applications of machine learning methods for enabling long-time scale dynamic simulation of photo-induced chemical process in complex molecular system. Today, we have invited him to give a talk about his work, and let's welcome him here. So Max, so now I think it's your turn. You can speak your talk. So I will give the mic to you, okay?
Thank you very much for the very nice introduction. Hello, everyone. So I will try to share my screen. Let me just put this in presentation mode. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I think we can see your screen, no problem. Yeah. Okay. So you can start, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so as Professor Zhengang already introduced it, I'm going to talk about the project that I am leading here in Marseille, related to the unsupervised learning analysis of non-adiabatic molecular dynamics. And for me today, it's a great responsibility to speak for this audience in particular, because Professor Zhengang is here, and many of the ideas that I'm going to present today were inspired by his work. So as you will see in a moment. And by the end of the talk, I also prepared the tutorial material that we will discuss and see how this uLambda package works in practice in a Python environment. So first of all, we need to think about molecular dynamics as a data generator. Why we need to use something more sophisticated to analyze this type of data? So if you think about non-adiabatic molecular dynamics as a data generator, basically what we have is a sequence of frames with the different configurations of the molecule that you can flatten this into a vector. You have many ways of representing this as a numerical vector. I will discuss this a bit more later. And you can even extend this vector with some quantum properties that is calculated during the dynamics. And with this whole information, you can create such a big table with the full information of the dynamics. And of course, if you go to large, long time scale, this table becomes bigger and bigger, and it's much more complicated to analyze. If you go to surface hopping approximation, you should add one extra layer of complexity to this diagram, which is the number of trajectories that we need to run to some sort of emulate the behavior of the quantum package that we do not have in this kind of dynamics, because it's a classical propagation. But then we run many independent trajectories through the statistics, we can get the information of the quantum propagation. So now we have something that is really high dimensional, and the question is, how can we obtain some relevant patterns from this big data set? And just to talk a little bit more about excited state molecular dynamics, in general, what we have is multiple surfaces. Each surface characterizes one particular electronic state of the molecule. And in general, you start from different initial conditions, like in this case, two very close initial conditions, and let the system to evolve on one excited state surface until it find the point of crossing, where the molecule has some probability to jump to another surface, or eventually can still continue in the same surface. So if you imagine that we have many trajectories like this one, pictorially demonstrated here, it's really common to have challenging questions related to this problem. And for example, we may want to know what are the most important coordinates driving the molecule to the regions of the conical intersection or the hopping regions. We can also ask for the molecules that reach this region of the conical intersection, what are the common features that we have in the geometries? This is also important to characterize the dynamical process. And also, each one of the geometries is characterized by a large vector, and we want to eventually visualize these geometries evolving time. So how can we do that for something that is intrinsically high dimension? And finally, we can also identify different types of trajectories depending on how they evolve on these different surfaces. So many of these questions are very hard to answer just by manual inspection of the data set. And for this reason, we can use unsupervised machine learning as a tool to help us in this kind of analysis. So that's the goal, is to try to answer most of these questions in a very automated way. So thinking on this problem, we decided to create our own tool interfaced with the NewtonX program that we use, that we develop in our group to perform surface hopping nonadiabatic molecular dynamics. And we have this unsupervised learning analysis for molecular dynamics, ULAMD package, that is interfaced with NewtonX to analyze the output of the dynamics. But not only this, we can eventually use some techniques like clustering, for instance, to have a better sampling, to create a better training set for supervised learning analysis that we can do with MLAtom, also interfaced with NewtonX. So we now have this kind of full pipeline that include both supervised and unsupervised learning coupled to the NewtonX program. So in ULAMD, our goal is to make this process of the unsupervised learning analysis as automated as possible. And this basically starts with the data acquisition from the NewtonX outputs. We can, after that, generate some descriptors based on these outputs. We do some data standardization to finally run our unsupervised learning analysis that can be dimension reduction or clustering analysis. I will talk in more details later. And finally, we also provide some statistics for the output of this unsupervised learning analysis. So our goal is to have all this pipeline implemented in a single package that everyone can easily run this pipeline and get some chemical insights from these simulations. So how it works, basically, as I said, we should start from the data processing part, because in the case of NewtonX, that is a surface hopping, basically a surface hopping approach for this nonadiabatic dynamics. We have many folders. Each folder corresponds to an independent simulation with some text file that contains the information that we need. So the first thing is that ULAMD is going to check all these directories, these trajectory directories, and build a single data set with the whole information that is collected from there. which includes like a total energy or the energy of the first state, which is in our case the ground state. We have some columns to describe if there is a hopping geometry or not, and so on. So the big advantage of putting this into some standard format is that it's much more easy to filter the data to check what is going on. Even before doing the unsupervised learning analysis, it already facilitates the typical analysis that we do for in the case of nonadiabatic dynamics. So after that, we come to the core part of this talk, which is unsupervised learning. So in contrast to supervised learning, in unsupervised learning, we do not provide to the function that we need to optimize the target, the labels. So the machine is trained only with information of input. So the task basically is to recognize in some automated way differences in the data set or similarities in the data set and give labels based on these similarities. That's one example that we have, for instance, in the case of clustering analysis. And for that, we need to use some notion of what is similar, what is dissimilar in a data set. In our case, we will speak I will speak a little bit more about this later, but the main idea is to discover patterns in our data set without using explicitly using a label for that. And there is a good side of this. And the good side is because we don't need the label, so it's much less expensive than supervised learning, where we need to have a labeled data set to work on. On the other hand, because we do not have the labels, it's very difficult to judge the results of our unsupervised learning analysis. It's kind of many times it's kind of subjective, and it's difficult to evaluate if the result is good or not. There are many different branches in unsupervised learning analysis. The most popular ones are clustering or data compression, also known as dimensionality reduction. And for each one of these categories, we have also many algorithms that can be used for this task. And in Ulambri, we have implemented some of these algorithms using basically the implementation available in scikit-learn. And the idea of clustering, for instance, is to basically operate in the original dimension of the data set and try to find groups based on some similarities. Like in this example in the left side, you see you have a sort of many points. And in this case, because it's two-dimensional, it's very easy to just find these groups. In dimensionality reduction, the idea is, of course, to project the data into a low-dimensional space in such a way that we can still preserve most of the information that we have in our original data set. In the case of molecular dynamics, we can consider this analysis in two possible ways. We can either compare molecules that come from different trajectories and time steps to see and to group them based on some similarity criteria, or we can consider every trajectory as a data object, and we compare these trajectories to find the most similar ones. In this case, for instance, we may be interested to find the different reaction pathways that we have during the dynamics. Some of them can result into different molecular products. But today I'm going to talk more about this geometry space problem here. So we have every point in our data set correspond to a molecule, and we want to identify some patterns from this kind of data set. And the first step in this process, after, of course, selecting all the geometries, is to convert them into some sort of descriptors We have already many possibilities in Nonadiabatic. We basically have two types. One is based on the pairwise distance between atoms. The other one is the traditional Z matrix that you know from computational chemistry. There are some other variants from these that we can do. I will show you better during the tutorial. And the question is, if you have, for instance, some scalar quantity like the potential energy, is very easy to plot this as a function of time, but most of the cases we are interested to know what is going on, what is happening with the molecule in every point of this curve. And in this case, we describe our molecule by a numerical vector given by the descriptor that I talked before. And in this case, we have high dimensional vectors, so it's not possible to simply visualize them. And for that, we need to use some sort of dimensionality reduction techniques to compress this information to in a meaningful way, and be able to easily identify what's going on with the molecule during the dynamics. So I will give you some examples of dimensionality reduction for this type of nonadiabatic dynamics data set. And in Nonadiabatic, we have some methods available. One of them is a very popular and old method called the principal component analysis. It's a linear method. It's difficult to handle nonlinear data sets, of course, because it's because of the approximation itself. But we also have some other nonlinear methods like kernel PCA or isometric feature mapping that's able to capture the intrinsic topology of your data set. For example, this S shape, it's basically a two-dimensional object. You can imagine like a piece of paper that you can fold in this S shape. So it's, if you just stretch the paper, you have a two-dimensional object that is embedded in a 3D space. So your algorithm should be able to identify this intrinsic topology. And one of the good methods for that is the isometric feature mapping. We have also others like stochastic neighbor embedding also available in Nonadiabatic. So for a demonstration today, I'm going to use a data set for a simple molecule, a prototype molecule that undergoes transformation during a nonadiabatic molecular dynamics, which is called Fulvin. This molecule shown in the left side. And basically, in this case, we have two states. We start from the first excited state. And after some time, there is a initial relaxation of the CC bond. So there is a bond stretch that brings the molecule to the region of the intersection between the two surfaces, where the hopping probability becomes large. And we have also a second motion that is important, that is this rotation of the CH2 groups. So this is a very good example to analyze and test our methods, because essentially, if we focus on these two degrees of freedom, we can get most of the relevant information for this dynamic. So we have a data set that is composed of about 100,000 points, and this is the data set that I used in this preliminary study that I'm going to talk in the next. So as the first example, you can look at these two diagrams. Of course, depending on the algorithm that you use, you can end up with a totally different representation of your data in the low dimensional space. So in this case, I used the same descriptor, is the pairwise distance between the atoms. And the PCA just is not able to split this data set in nice groups. So you have a mix of different points here. But if you use the non-dimensional, the nonlinear method isomap for this task, you can get this kind of ring shape where it's relatively easy to separate the regions of small energy gap, that are the blue points, from the one with the large energy gap. So that's one of the things we want to do in this kind of analysis. Once you are able to project this in a low-dimensional space, you can, for example, color the points according to the energy gap and easily identify geometries that are similar to each other, and also are characterized by the small energy gap, and they are somehow different from those that have a large energy gap. This is what the diagram is showing to us. If, for example, we select some molecules in this a bunch of points, blue points here and the red one, we can see that they really differ with respect to the C5C6 bond length that I mentioned before, which is a key coordinate for the dynamics of Fulvin. So in this case, we can see that the algorithm was able to identify this distinction between the two groups of molecules. In the next, I would like to talk about clustering methods.
Hi,
and
Max,
also,
I think you should speed up your talk a little bit, please.
okay, we'll try
Okay,
to.
so you just speed up, okay?
Okay. So yeah, maybe I can talk a little bit more about the algorithms later, but in Ulambi, we also have some different types of methods for this problem of grouping data points based on similarities. And one example that I can mention here is the k-means. It's one of the most popular methods for clustering. And in this case, of course, we cannot just visualize the results in a simple way, because it's we are operating on the full descriptor, but we can plot some of the coordinates and see how the groups are formed. So we see, for example, that the yellow groups are the one that contain most of the hopping geometries represented by these stars here. But when you look at the geometry that belongs to each one of the cluster, we see that this descriptor is not very suitable because we cannot capture, for instance, the rotation that I mentioned before. We should expect that one of the clusters should contain most of the geometry with 90 degrees rotation that we cannot see in this case. But if we apply some transformation in a Z-matrix representation that already contains angles and dihedrals, we can now obtain this a nice separation between the geometries that contains 90-degree rotation and the other one that differ mostly with respect to the bond length. So we also see this difference when we plot this diagram of the two most important coordinates, that is the bond stretch, the C5C6 bond stretch, and also the dihedral angle. So we see now that the algorithm is able to separate this ready point from the rest, where we can have two different types of hopping geometries. We have hopping geometries that are characterized by the bond stretch, but we also have hopping geometries that are related to this rotation. So of course, this is a very simple system. If you go to more complex system, it's much more interesting because it's difficult to explore this type of motion in a complex system like you have in this paper by Professor Zangan. And we are also thinking to go in this direction. And we are now studying a molecule called PSB4 that Professor Mario Babati already studied in the past, but using some sort of handmade rules to select the different type of torsions that you have in this molecule. So the idea now is try to identify these 5 different types of rotations that was discussed before in the paper, using unsupervised learning. So we did the first step in this direction, and even with a simple PCA diagram, we can already identify 3 different reaction pathways in this case that probably correspond to some of these rotation described here. And we are now investigating this problem in more details. So just to conclude, just some take-home message that you can consider. The type of descriptor you use and also the distance metrics is very important to have a good discrimination or a good grouping technique. It's also important to take care of the data standardization because most of these algorithms rely on comparison between data points by distances. So it's very important to use data standardization. And we should also compare different methods before getting some insights about the data set, because many times you have different approaches that gives you different information about your data set. And finally, in some cases, it's also possible to compute error metrics. There are some algorithms that you can use error metrics to evaluate how good the model is. For example, in dimension reduction, we can calculate the reconstruction error. For clustering, you have some internal or external metrics to evaluate the clustering performance. So you can read more about many of the things I talked today. In this chapter 9, for instance, I discussed a bit about kernel methods for unsupervised learning. We have a chapter also about excited state dynamics using machine learning, and this very nice chapter that is pretty much related to what I talked today. That is the analysis of non-adiabatic molecular dynamics trajectories using these dimensional reduction clustering techniques. With that, I would like to thank you all for your attention, for the organizers, and thank you for your attention. So I will be happy to answer any question that you may have in the audience.
Okay, thanks, Max, for the very interesting talk. So now is the time for the questions. So maybe the audience can just raise up your hand by click some buttons in the downside panel and then trying to say what's going on. And also you can just type your questions, maybe I can read, or someone can just type you have questions. I can invite you to ask the speakers. So it's time for the questions now. So is there anyone who has questions for this very interesting talk? Come on, I think I particularly will. Okay, hi.
I have a question about this clustering method, right? So like you mentioned, like some clustering method works for something and then some other clustering method works for something else. Is there any clustering method which works for all, like the bondings and everything, which can work for all?
As far as I know, no, I mean, because it's always a combination of many different factors, like how you represent the molecule. It makes a difference, like I shown before. I used the same algorithm, but just changing the descriptor, I can emphasize more some of the degrees of freedom and make easier to the algorithm to discover specific types of geometries. So that's the hard part of unsupervised learning in general, because we do not have the labels. We need to try different approaches, even from the side of the descriptor or either from the side of the clustering method. But I would say that there is no unique approach that can give you always a very good answer in this case. Of course, we would expect that in molecular data sets in general, nonlinearities are important. So k-means is not the best approach in this case. That's the reason why I added some nonlinearity by hand in the descriptor when I talked about the Z-matrix. And but there are some other methods like spectral clustering that eventually can handle this type of nonlinearities much better than k-means can do. And it's always a matter of trying different algorithms. And of course, it also depends on some chemical intuition, some chemical knowledge you already have from the problem. So, yeah.
I see. So we can combine them, right?
Yeah. Usually, like in the tutorial, you show some examples that you can even try different metrics to compare objects, right? Because your molecule is just, you can think of your molecule like a graph, and you can express this graph like a numerical vector. So how you say that two molecules are dissimilar? You can use simple Euclidean distance, but you can also use the cosine distance that is more suitable when you have large vectors. That's an idea that I took from people in the NELP community, for instance, because they have very big vectors. Normally, they compare this using cosine distance. That was the case I used here in this picture, in this case. So, for instance, to compare two molecules, I take the full R2 descriptor and calculate the cosine distance between them. So this also makes some difference in the algorithm.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I think the second person who wants to ask a question is Linjun Wang from Zhejiang University. Hi, Linjun, you can speak. Okay. Hi. Hello. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you, Max, for the very interesting talk. I just wonder, could you move to page 24?
Sorry?
Page 24. Slide 24.
24. Okay, here. Yes.
Yeah, it seems that your clustering of the structures are based on the coordinates, or I mean, basically it's based on the structures. But on the right side, and the S0 S1 energy gap has a strong overlap between these clustering. I mean, cluster 1 and cluster 2 and cluster 3. I just wonder, have you tried to probably cluster the structures according to some other quantities? I think energy is some kind of important quantity, the dynamics. Probably also some other quantities like transition dipole or some other stuff. I mean, it depends on the problems that we're studying. Actually, I mean, for short, my question is maybe energy is also very important in the clustering. Could you comment on this? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. This is very related to one thing that we show in the tutorial. I didn't mention in details before, but in this type of unsupervised learning analysis that we are doing here, we already have the full data set. So, and this data set contains not only geometries, but also information of the energy gradients and so on. Everything that is calculated in the dynamics is available to analyze. So in the case of energies, for instance, I didn't make a try, but the example that I will going to show in the tutorial is the gradient, based on the gradient, because the gradient it's a good quantity. It's very sensible to the regions of conical intersection. So if you use this information to cluster the molecules, you can eventually get a much better grouping structure of the data. So yes, in our case, we have this information of the gradient for the S0 and S1 state. And when you combine them as a descriptor to group the molecules, we get a much better picture of the regions related to conical intersection, for instance. But yeah, in this case here, I'm using, it was very well noted by you, I'm using this information of S0, S1 energy gap as a proxy just to see what is going on with my clusters afterwards. Which is also some very recommended approach if you want to look at your final results of the clustering analysis and see if it makes sense or not. Because, for instance, in this case, we have the superposition, almost a superposition of the red and the blue cluster. But when we change the descriptor, we have a much better description because we can characterize two different types of crossing points. One that involves the rotation and another one that involves the bond stretch. So
Yes.
both the two coordinates bring the system to the conical intersection region, and you see that they actually have small energy gaps in general, in average, and they are different from the one of the blue cluster.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I maybe have a small side question.
Yeah.
When you use different quantities in the clustering, suppose you also include structure and energy, they have different units. Then
Yes.
It will be kind of difficult to define the distance between the two structures because of there are different quantities actually. If we renormalize the data, I mean, it's one way. Removes the unit, but still it seems that it's like a weighting factor. How to define this? I mean, I have this kind of I'm interested in this. Do you have similar I mean some ideas to describe all this?
Well, there is, I think, one possibility to have a normal normalization, let's say, standardization for this kind for these other quantities like the energy. For example, Professor Pavlo proposed the RE descriptor for geometries that you compare the geometries of geodynamics, for instance, with a reference one, typically the ground state one. You can do the same thing for other quantities, where you could divide the energy by the energy of the ground state, let's say. Mm-hmm. So you would have I would expect to have something in the same range of variation. But aside from that, from the point of view of machine learning itself, I really recommend in this kind of clustering analysis to standardize the data. So you have the centered mean and standard deviation equal to 1 for each one of the features. Normally, when you do this kind of standardization, even if different quantities like energy or bond length, distances between atoms, you can still get some reasonable descriptor to compare different vectors because they are more or less in the same scale.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, I think the third person who really want to ask a question is Brigitta. So hello, would you want to speak?
I can also ask the question speaking. Okay. So I just wanted to ask, Max, so first, thank you very much for the talk. It's really nice to incorporate more algorithms like this in the workflow. I wanted to know whether you tried more than these two mentioned descriptors, because you mentioned the distance matrix and the Z matrix. Did you also try, for example, the Coulomb matrix or something else, maybe including like the atom types?
Not exactly the Coulomb matrix, but I tried something that is more or less related to this. That is the mass-weighted coordinates, because then we can distinguish between carbons and hydrogen explicitly. I guess this is more or less related to your question. So then I implemented in this family of R2 descriptor that I mentioned before here. So we can also have these mass-weighted coordinates. Then we can incorporate into the descriptor the information of the atom types. The same thing for the Z matrix. You can also build in this way. For other types of local descriptors, I didn't try yet. It's a bit more involved to implement. And also I am planning to add some other algorithms to recover the information afterwards, because it's nice if you can go back to your XYZ coordinates at the end and see what is happening. which is not always straightforward depending on the type of descriptor you use. So for this type of, I know that there are some approximation for this type of pairwise distance that you can recover the XYZ matrix. And Z matrix you already have, you can just visualize. So this is to facilitate the last step of the workflow, which is to look at the geometries and see, okay, in my cluster, what is going on is such a kind of rotation or bond stretch and so on. So once you have the labels of the cluster, it's important to also attach them to a given geometry and recover this information. But yeah, in the future, I'm also planning to add the Puli internal coordinates because it's kind of more complete than Z matrix for this type of task. So I hope it gives a better description also. But for now, we have these two possibilities.
Okay, thanks. So the mass-weighted coordinates, this helped in general, or in your cases that you presented, it didn't make that much of a difference?
For this molecule in particular, I didn't see too much difference. Maybe in some other cases, it could help, but yeah, for this case of Fulvin, I didn't see too much difference.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think the next person is Max Tiefenbach. Hello, hi Max. Yeah, hello. You can go on.
Hello. So thank you very much for your talk, Max. And my question was, would be if you have tried like different clustering methods, because every time I try to use clustering methods on Sci-Hub, I get, or on SciPy, I get like bombarded by the amount of choice I have. So what have you tried and what worked good for you?
In this particular case of Fulvin, yes, I have tried different ones, and that helped me to decide which ones I should include in Nulanding. And I think these three can take different views of the data. But in the particular case of Fulvin, for my surprise, the best result was K-means. And there are some, like in the case of spectral clustering, for instance, it's kind of very expensive to compute. So if you need to group a lot of points, because in the case of nonadiabatic dynamics, in general, we have just a few hopping geometries and a lot of other geometries, maybe close to the conical intersection, but not a hopping one. And if you want to apply a method to a large data set, spectral clustering is very expensive, although it can handle some nonlinearities. But in my test with Fulvin, the best result was K-means. And I believe that the trick was really the type of descriptor that was used in this case. And also one thing that I like in K-means is that the algorithm is quite simple to interpret and there is no too many hyperparameters. Like in spectral clustering, you have, you basically need to define the parameter of your kernel. For instance, you have a Gaussian kernel that is that gives you the comparison between points, and you need to set the widths of these Gaussians. The hierarchical, for instance, you can define what is the condition that you use to take 2 points and merge them into a cluster. You can consider the minimal distance, the maximal one, the average between them. All these are hyperparameters that add some complexity to your task. So you need to try too many things. And that's why I really like to start with K-means. But maybe I was lucky that this worked for Fulvin. For some other molecules, we may need to try more complex algorithms for the task. But yeah. In my case, I have tried these three, and the best one was K-means.
Okay, thank you very much. So you think it's more a challenge of finding the right descriptors than finding like a super fancy clustering algorithm, at least in this case, of course.
Yes, yes. I would take more. I would put more effort in the descriptor side than in the algorithm at first place.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so how about the other person? Is there any question, a person who has additional questions? Okay, so maybe not. I mean, I want to say a few words about your work. So thanks, Max, for very interesting talk. And I like your work very much. So I only want to mention about this descriptor side. So we I think last year we proposed another way to construct the descriptor, because as mentioned by Lin Jun, sometimes you have different quantities. So it's very difficult to measure the distance for different quantities. For example, if you really go to internal coordinate, you have bound angle, bound distance. So they cannot be the same range. So in this situation, I don't think the normalization can solve your problem. So this is why we suggest to divide the descriptor to different subsets. Okay, so then we're trying to make analysis about clustering or dimensionality reduction for each subset of the descriptor. So then we can try to pick out which is the best one. And then we can create some hierarchy, analyze way to analyze non-adiabatic trajectory evolution, something like this. So if you are interested, maybe you can take a look at this work. So I think this might partly solve the problem proposed by Lin Jun. For example, you have different quantities. But I think there's also one challenge stuff. I mean, when I write our first paper about dimensionality reduction, so one was referee who asked me a very critical question. He asked me whether it is possible to really trying to find the connection pattern between electronic motion and nuclear motion. So I think this is even more challenging, right? So I think we have a lot of the long time to go. So I'm happy to see your progress. So I think maybe we should keep in touch. I think in the future, let's meet somewhere. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, I took inspiration, a lot of inspiration from your work. I read many of your papers are very, very nice. Okay. And I took some of this inspiration. I tried to do some other stuff, try different things, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Thanks, Mario Bavati as well. Okay. Okay. So I think maybe let's close your talk today. So you still have a few minutes to explain, give some tutorial about your code. So maybe now it's time for you. So you still have a few minutes to finish the tutorial. So maybe the student will be very happy to do it. Okay.
Yes.
So maybe I can say the seminar basically is over. So if someone who are interested in this tutorial about how to analyze the trajectory, you can stay. But if you have other things, maybe now let's say the Zoom meeting is basically over. So let's welcome. Let's thank the Max for his interesting talk again. Okay. Okay. So hi, hello. Okay. So I think Brigitte still have questions, right? Hello?
Pablo is saying that.
Yeah,
it says that basically tutorials open end.
Okay, so tutorial is basically open end. Yeah, I think I can deliver.
That's for people who want to learn.
Yeah, I think I will deliver the meeting to the Max, so we can decide when to stop your talk. Okay.
So okay. should I move directly to the tutorial already, or
yeah
yes, if you want to have a break you can, but yeah, you can move on.
Maybe one minute just for people.
Okay, 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay.
For everyone. So please don't leave. Those who want to listen to tutorial and actually practice your tutorial and want to learn this, please stay. And so we'll come back in 1 minute. Okay.
Yeah.